I rented the cabin because I wanted to be alone for a few days. That was the only reason. Work had been loud, my phone never stopped, and my head felt full all the time. The cabin was supposed to be quiet. It sat deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, with one dirt road leading to it. The listing showed rough wooden walls, a small porch, and trees packed so close together they looked like a wall. It felt safe in a boring way. I told myself nothing ever happens in places like that. The drive there took longer than I expected. The road slowly turned from pavement to gravel, then to dirt. My tires kicked up dust that hung in the air behind me. Trees leaned over the road, blocking the sky. There was no signal on my phone. The quiet felt heavy, like the air before a storm. When I finally saw the cabin, it looked smaller than the pictures. The wood was darker, the porch sagged a little, and the windows reflected nothing but trees. I parked and sat in the car for a minute, listening. No birds, no wind, no distant cars. Just silence. I grabbed my bag and walked up to the door. The key was hidden under a loose rock, just like the owner said. That part already made me uncomfortable. Anyone could have known that. The door opened with a long creak, the kind that feels too loud even when no one is around. Inside, the cabin smelled like old wood and dust. There was a small table, a couch with a thin blanket, a narrow bed, and a kitchen area with a sink and a stove that looked older than me. One window faced the trees, another faced the dirt road. I noticed right away that there were no curtains. I told myself it didn't matter. No one was out here. I unpacked slowly, trying to settle in. As the sun went down, the light through the trees turned orange, then gray, then disappeared. The darkness came fast. I turned on the single overhead light. It buzzed softly. I cooked a simple meal and ate standing up. Every sound felt louder than it should have. My own footsteps sounded wrong, like someone else walking behind me. That night, I barely slept. The cabin made noises as it cooled. Wood popped and shifted. I kept waking up, staring at the window, convinced I saw movement. Every time, it was just branches swaying or shadows changing shape. I told myself I was not used to real quiet anymore. My brain was filling in the gaps. The next morning, I woke up tired but calmer. Daylight made everything feel less threatening. I stepped outside and breathed in the cold air. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were near the side of the cabin, half pressed into the dirt. Nude animal prints, boot prints, big ones. They looked fresh. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at them. I told myself they could be from the owner or a maintenance worker. That explanation didn't fully sit right, but I forced it to. I decided to go for a walk to shake the feeling. The trail behind the cabin was narrow and barely marked. Trees crowded in close, their branches scraping against each other when the wind picked up. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, then turned back. The woods felt like they were watching me, even though I knew that made no sense. When I got back to the cabin, the door was closed. I was sure I had left it slightly open. I stood there staring at the handle, my heart beating harder. I checked the lock. It was locked. I unlocked it slowly and stepped inside. Nothing looked different at first. Then I noticed the chair near the table. I was almost certain I had left it pushed in. Now it was pulled out. Just a little. Enough to notice. My mouth felt dry. He walked through the cabin, checking everything. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But the air felt different, like someone else's warmth hadn't fully faded yet. I locked the door and stayed inside the rest of the day. As evening came, the fear settled deeper. I kept replaying the footprints in my head. I checked my phone again. No signal. I tried calling anyway. Nothing. I felt stupid for not telling anyone exactly where I was going. That night, I heard footsteps outside. They were slow and heavy, circling the cabin. Not pacing, not rushing, just walking. Leaves crunched. Twigs snapped. I stayed frozen in the bed, barely breathing. The overhead light was off. The cabin was dark. I watched the window, waiting for a face to appear. A shadow passed by the glass. Tall, wide shoulders. It paused. I felt my whole body go cold. The shadow moved on. He heard the footsteps farther, then stopped somewhere closer.
I didn't sleep at all. Morning came again, and with it a thin layer of frost on the ground. I forced myself to step outside. The footprints were back, clearer this time. They circled the cabin completely, right up to the windows. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared into the trees. I packed my things in a rush. I didn't care about staying anymore. I just wanted to leave. When I tried to start my car, it made a dry clicking sound and nothing else. I tried again. Same sound. My hands started shaking. I popped the hood and stared at the engine like that would help. I didn't know enough about cars to fix anything. That's when I noticed the wires. A few of them were cut clean through. The panic hit hot and fast. Someone didn't just wander by. Someone planned this.
I ran back into the cabin and locked the door, even though I knew a lock wouldn't stop someone who really wanted to get in.
I grabbed the only thing that could be used as a weapon, a heavy metal pan, and sat on the floor away from the windows. Time stretched. Every minute felt like 10. The sun moved slowly across the sky. I heard movement outside again in the afternoon. Footsteps. Then the sound of something scraping against the side of the cabin. I stayed still. I didn't make a sound. I focused on breathing quietly, slowly, hoping whoever was out there would think the cabin was empty. Late in the day, the sound stopped. I waited longer than felt safe. When I finally looked out the window, I saw smoke rising in the distance. Thin and gray. A fire. Close enough to be real, not imagined. That meant someone was still out there. When night came again, I made a decision. Staying meant waiting for something worse. I waited until it was fully dark, then slipped out the back door and moved into the trees. I walked without a light, guided by memory and instinct. Branches scratched my arms. I tripped more than once but kept going. I followed the dirt road by feel until my feet hit pavement. Hours later, headlights appeared. I stepped into the road waving both arms. The car stopped. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My shaking said enough. I never went back to that cabin. Later I learned it had been used by someone living off the land nearby, someone who didn't want visitors. The police found signs of someone staying there on and off for years. I still think about how close I came to not leaving at all. The quiet doesn't comfort me anymore.
It never really did. I went to the cabin alone because I needed quiet. That is the truth I tell people even now. The deeper truth is that I wanted to disappear for a few days without anyone checking on me. The cabin was cheap, far from town, and only showed one photo online. A small wooden place by a tree line, nothing special. I packed light. Old boots, thick socks, canned food, a flashlight, my phone, and a pocket knife that I had never used before. The drive took hours. The road turned from smooth to cracked, then to gravel, then to mud. Trees closed in on both sides like a tunnel. When I finally parked, the silence felt heavy, like pressure on my ears. The cabin looked older in real life. The wood was dark and swollen from rain. The roof sagged a little in the middle. There was a porch with one step missing. The door stuck when I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled like dust, damp wood, and something sour that I could not name. There was one room with a small kitchen corner, a table, a couch, and a bed pushed against the wall. A narrow bathroom sat in the back. The windows were small and cloudy. The light coming in looked weak, like it had to fight to get inside. I checked my phone. No signal. I expected that. I set my bag down and walked through the place slowly. I touched the walls. The wood felt cold. There were scratches near the doorframe, long and uneven, like someone had dragged something heavy in and out. I told myself it was furniture. I opened the cabinets. Most were empty. One had old plates with chips along the edges. The fridge worked, but it hummed loud and steady, like it was breathing. The first day passed without much happening. I cleaned a little. I swept the floor and wiped the table. I ate cold food and drank water from the bottles I brought. Outside, the forest stayed still. No birds, no wind, just the sound of trees standing. When evening came, the light dropped fast. The woods went dark in a way that felt sudden, like someone had turned off a switch. I locked the door and checked the windows. The lock was old, but it held. That night, I slept poorly. The couch was too soft, and every small sound woke me. The fridge hummed. The cabin creaked as the temperature dropped. I heard something brush against the side of the cabin once, then again later. It sounded like fabric or leaves dragged by a slow hand. I told myself it was branches. I stayed still until morning. The second day felt wrong from the start. I woke up tired, like I had not slept at all. When I stepped outside, the air felt thick. The ground around the cabin was muddy, even though it had not rained. I noticed footprints near the porch. They were not clear, but they were there. Too big to be mine. The shape looked off, like the weight had sunk deep into the mud. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at them, trying to make sense of the angle. They pointed toward the trees. I walked around the cabin, keeping my distance from the forest edge. Behind the cabin, I found an old shed half collapsed. Inside were broken tools, a rope, and empty cans. The rope was cut clean at one end. I did not touch it. I went back inside and locked the door again. I checked my phone. Still no signal. The battery was already lower than it should have been. As the day went on, small things kept bothering me. The fridge stopped humming for a while, then started again louder than before. The lights flickered when I turned them on. I found a smear on the window that looked like a handprint, but when I wiped it, it smeared instead of clearing, like grease. I washed my hands 3 times after that. In the afternoon, I heard footsteps outside, slow and uneven. They stopped near the porch. I stayed frozen on the couch, my heart beating hard enough that I felt it in my throat. The steps moved around the cabin, close to the walls, then faded towards the trees. I did not look out the window. I did not move until my legs went numb. That night, I did not sleep at all. I sat with my back against the wall, the flashlight in my hand, the knife in my pocket. The sounds came and went. Something brushed the cabin again, harder this time. The door handle rattled once, just a little, like someone testing it. I felt sick. I thought about running, but the path to the car went straight past the trees. Morning came slowly. Gray light filled the room. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The footprints were back, closer than before. One was right below the window. The mud showed deep lines, like toes had pressed in hard. I looked toward the car. It was still there, but the driver's side door was open. I walked to the car with my eyes on the trees. The door had scratches along the paint. Thin, straight lines. The inside smelled wrong, like metal and sweat. The keys were still in my pocket. I sat down, closed the door, and tried to start it. The engine turned once, then died. I tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead. I went back to the cabin shaking. I locked the door and pulled the table against it. I checked the windows and covered them with a blanket I found in the closet. I stayed quiet. Hours passed. My phone battery dropped to 10%. Still no signal. I turned it off to save power. The sound came again in the afternoon. This time it did not move away. It stayed close, circling, stopping, starting again. I smelled it before I saw anything. A sharp, dirty smell that made my eyes water. I held my breath. The floor creaked near the door, then near the window. Something pressed against the wall hard enough to make the wood groan. The window blanket shifted. I saw a shadow pass behind it. Not clear, not shaped right. I backed away until I hit the bathroom door. My hands shook so bad I dropped the flashlight. It rolled and pointed at the floor, lighting up the scratches near the doorframe again. I realized then that they were not from furniture. They were too high. The pressure on the wall stopped.
The sounds faded. I waited. Minutes passed, then more.
When nothing happened, I forced myself to move. I grabbed my bag, the knife, and the flashlight. I went out the back door instead of the front. The trees were closer there, but the ground sloped down toward a narrow dirt road I had seen on the map before I left. I ran. I did not look back. Branches hit my face and arms. I slipped in the mud and scraped my knee, but I kept going. I heard movement behind me, heavy and fast. My lungs burned. The road appeared suddenly, just a thin strip of dirt. I ran along it until my legs gave out. A truck came hours later. I do not know how long I lay there. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. The doctors said I was dehydrated and exhausted. The police asked questions. They went to the cabin. They found the footprints, the scratches, and signs that someone had been living in the woods nearby. A man with a long record who had disappeared months before. They never found him. I do not go into the woods anymore. I still smell that sharp, dirty scent sometimes, even in clean places. I still wake up at night when the house creaks. The cabin was real. What happened there was real. I survived because I ran when I did. The ending is clear to me now. Some places are quiet because something in them wants to stay hidden, and it does not want to be alone. I went to the cabin because I needed space, not adventure. I had just finished a long stretch of work, my head was full, and I wanted quiet. The cabin was old but solid, sitting deep in the mountains, surrounded by tall trees that blocked most of the sky. The road leading to it was narrow and rough, with patches of gravel and mud, and it took much longer than expected to reach the place. By the time I arrived, it was already late afternoon. The sun was low, and the light coming through the trees felt thin and weak. The cabin looked smaller in real life than it did in the pictures. The wood was dark from age and weather, and the roof dipped slightly in the middle. There was no fence, no other buildings, and no clear sign that anyone had been there recently. The silence stood out right away. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind where every small sound feels loud because nothing else is happening. My footsteps on the dirt felt heavy. The wind moved the branches slowly, and I could hear leaves scraping against each other far above me. Inside, the cabin smelled like old wood, dust, and something slightly sour, like damp fabric that never fully dried. There was one main room, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow hallway that led to a bedroom and a bathroom. Everything looked untouched. No food, no trash, no personal items, just furniture and basic supplies. I dropped my bag near the table and walked around, checking each corner more out of habit than fear. At that point, nothing felt wrong. It just felt empty. As evening came, the light faded fast. The trees blocked most of the sunset, so the cabin slipped into darkness quicker than I expected. I turned on the lamps inside, and the yellow light made the walls look even older. The shadows felt thick, especially in the corners where the light didn't reach well. I cooked a simple meal and ate alone, listening to the sounds outside. The wind picked up a little, and something scratched against the side of the cabin every now and then. I told myself it was just branches. When night fully settled in, the forest changed. During the day, I could hear birds and insects. At night, it felt empty in a different way. The sounds came in short bursts instead of a steady background. A snap of a branch, leaves rustling suddenly, then stopping. Something moving far away, then nothing. I tried to distract myself by reading, but I kept losing my place. My eyes kept lifting from the page to look at the dark windows. Around midnight, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were marks in the dirt outside the front of the cabin. They looked like footprints, but not clear ones. I hadn't seen them earlier, or maybe I just didn't pay attention. The ground was hard in some spots and soft in others. The marks went toward the tree line and disappeared. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at them, trying to figure out if they were mine from earlier. I couldn't remember stepping in that exact spot. I locked the door and checked the windows. They were old but still solid. The locks worked, though they felt loose and worn. I went to bed telling myself that people had probably been here before me, that the marks could be from days ago. Still, sleep didn't come easily. Every small noise pulled me back awake. The cabin creaked as the temperature dropped. Wood popping, nails shifting, the building settling into the cold night. Sometime later, I heard movement close to the cabin. Not fast, not loud, just slow steps on leaves. I stayed still, listening. The steps stopped near the wall, close enough that I could almost picture someone standing there. My heart started beating harder, and my ears felt hot. I waited for something else to happen, but nothing did. After a long time, the sound faded back into the forest. The next morning, I woke up tired and stiff. The light outside looked gray and dull. Fog sat low between the trees, making everything feel closer and more closed in. I stepped outside carefully. The footprints were clearer now, fresh. They circled the cabin,
Not just one path, but several, overlapping in places. Some went right up to the windows. I felt exposed standing out there, like the trees were watching me. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe a hiker passed through. Maybe someone else knew about the cabin. Still, I packed my bag with more care than before. I planned to leave early the next day instead of staying longer like I had originally planned. I spent the day inside, keeping busy, but my attention kept drifting back to the windows and the door. That afternoon, I noticed the back door, which I hadn't used yet, had dirt smudges near the handle. Not clear fingerprints, just messy streaks like someone grabbed it with dirty hands. The door was locked. I checked it again and again, testing the handle. It held. But the thought of someone trying it made my chest feel tight. As night came again, I moved a chair in front of the front door. It wasn't strong protection, but it made me feel slightly better. I kept the lights on and didn't open the curtains. The sounds outside returned, closer this time. Slow movement, pauses, then more movement. I stayed on the bed, holding my phone, listening. At one point, I heard something brush against the wall near the bedroom. The sound was low and rough, like fabric or skin scraping wood. Hours passed like that. No, sudden breaking, no clear moment where something happened. Just waiting, listening, feeling my body tense and tired. Near morning, the sound stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy, like pressure in my ears. When daylight finally came, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my things and stepped outside. The footprints were everywhere now, all around the cabin, near every wall. Some went right up to the bedroom window. I noticed something else then. A piece of fabric caught on a low branch near the back. It looked torn, dirty, and old, not something I recognized. I didn't investigate further. I got into my car and started down the road as fast as I safely could. As I drove away, I checked the mirrors constantly, half expecting to see someone behind me or stepping out of the trees. The forest slowly thinned as I got closer to the main road, and my breathing finally started to calm. Later, after I reached a town and felt safe enough to stop, I thought about reporting it, but I realized I had nothing clear to report. No face, no proof, just footprints, sounds, and fear. The cabin was real. The marks were real. Someone had been there. I knew that much. I never went back. I deleted the listing, removed the pictures from my phone, and tried to forget the details. But sometimes, when it's quiet at night, I still remember how close those steps sounded, how the cabin felt surrounded, and how clear it was that I was not as alone as I believed.
I rented the cabin because it looked quiet in the photos. That was the only reason. I wanted a place where nothing would happen. No people, no noise, just trees and cold air and time to think. The listing said it was deep in the woods, 2 hours from the nearest town, no cell service, simple power from a generator, water from a tank. That sounded fine to me. I had grown tired of the city and the way everything always felt crowded and loud, even when I was alone. The drive there already felt wrong. The road kept getting thinner, cracked in places, with weeds growing up through the asphalt. The trees closed in so tightly that the sky turned into a narrow strip of gray above me. My car radio lost signal about 30 minutes before I reached the place. I drove the rest of the way in silence, listening to the tires roll over gravel and leaves. I remember thinking how easy it would be to get lost out there if something went wrong. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines and dead brush. It looked older than the pictures. The wood was dark and weather-stained, and the porch sagged slightly in the middle. One window had a crack that someone had tried to seal with clear tape. There were no other buildings nearby. No smoke, no distant lights. Just trees and quiet. Inside, the cabin smelled like dust, old wood, and something faintly sour, like water that had been sitting too long. The floor creaked under my boots. There was a small kitchen, a table with 2 chairs, a couch that had gone flat in the middle, and a narrow hallway leading to a bedroom and bathroom. Everything looked used, but not broken. The kind of place that had been passed around for years without anyone caring enough to fix it properly. I dropped my bag by the couch and walked around, checking things out. The generator was outside in a shed, with a handwritten note taped to it explaining how to start it. The water tank sat behind the cabin, streaked with rust. I noticed then that there were marks in the dirt near the back of the cabin. drag marks like something heavy had been pulled across the ground more than once. I told myself it was probably logs or equipment from maintenance. That explanation felt thin even as I thought it. The first night was quiet, too quiet, no wind, no insects. The silence pressed in so hard that every small sound felt loud. When I moved, the floor sounded like it was snapping under my feet. When I lay down, I could hear my own breathing echo slightly in the small room. I slept badly, waking up over and over for no clear reason. The second day, I explored the area a little. There was a narrow trail behind the cabin that led deeper into the woods. It looked like it had been used recently. The ground was packed down and branches had been pushed aside. I followed it for a while until the trees grew so thick that the light barely reached the ground. I started to feel watched then. Not in a dramatic way. Just a quiet feeling, like being noticed without being seen. I turned back before the trail disappeared completely. When I got back to the cabin, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. My footprints from earlier that morning were still there in the dirt near the porch, but beside them were other prints, boot prints, larger than mine, fresh. I stood still for a long time listening. The woods were silent again. I told myself maybe the owner or a worker had come by, but I knew that was unlikely. No car tracks, no note. Nothing disturbed except the ground. That night, I locked the door and pushed the small table against it, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. I slept with my jacket on and my boots beside the bed. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a sound that didn't belong there. A slow scrape, coming from outside. It wasn't steady. It stopped, then started again, like something being dragged across dirt. He lay still, barely breathing. The sound moved along the side of the cabin, close enough that I could hear it clearly through the walls. Then it stopped near the back, right where I had seen the drag marks earlier. I waited for it to go away. It didn't. Instead, I heard a dull thump, followed by a soft shuffling sound. I didn't sleep after that. When morning finally came, the light felt weak and gray. I stepped outside carefully. Near the back of the cabin, there were new marks in the dirt. Deeper than before, messier. There were also dark stains that I didn't want to think too hard about. I decided to leave. That should have been the end of it. I packed my bag quickly, my hands shaking. When I tried to start my car, the engine turned over once and then died. I tried again. Nothing. The battery was dead. That made no sense. I hadn't left anything on. I popped the hood and stared at the engine like that would help. That's when I noticed wires hanging loose, cleanly cut, not chewed. Cut. Panic set in fully then. I went back inside and grabbed my phone, even though I already knew there was no service. I checked anyway. Nothing. I thought about walking, but the road back was miles long, and the woods on either side felt too close. I spent the rest of the day inside, keeping the door locked, listening. Late in the afternoon, I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, heavy. They moved back and forth, stopping right outside the door. I stood in the hallway, holding a kitchen knife that felt useless in my hand. The footsteps left after a while. When night came, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the dark, back against the wall, trying to stay awake. Sometime deep into the night, I heard the scraping again, louder this time, closer. Then the sound of wood creaking under weight. The porch. The door handle moved, slowly, testing. I didn't scream. I don't know how I managed that. I stood there, shaking, listening to the handle turn back and forth. After a long time, it stopped. I heard footsteps move away from the cabin, toward the trees. I stayed frozen until morning. At first light, I ran. I didn't grab my bag. I didn't lock the door. I ran down the road, my boots slamming against the ground, my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I saw another car, a truck parked near a small service road. I waved and screamed until the driver saw me. The police went back with me later that day. They searched the cabin and the surrounding woods. Behind the cabin, not far from where the trail disappeared, they found a shallow pit covered with branches and dirt. Inside were belongings, clothes, shoes, things that had clearly belonged to more than one person. They never found anyone living out there, no suspects. The cabin was shut down and boarded up. The listing disappeared a few days later. I went home after giving my statement.
I still think about that place sometimes, about how quiet it was, about how easy it would be for someone to hide out there, watching, waiting. I don't rent cabins anymore. I don't go places where no one can hear you scream. And I never forget how real danger can be when there's nothing magical about it at all.
I drove up to the cabin because I wanted quiet, not adventure. I had been tired in a way sleep never fixed, the kind that sits behind the eyes and makes even small noises feel heavy. The cabin was listed as old but maintained, far from towns, surrounded by thick woods and a narrow dirt road that only showed up on the map when I zoomed in all the way. That was what I wanted. No neighbors, no phone service, no reminders of anything else. I packed simple food, water, a flashlight, spare batteries, and clothes for cold nights. I told myself it was just a few days. I told myself nothing bad happens when you plan properly. The drive took longer than expected. The road narrowed slowly, the pavement turning to gravel and then to packed dirt. Trees leaned closer as I went on, their branches arching over the road like ribs. My tires crunched loudly, and every sound inside the car felt too sharp in the silence. By the time I reached the cabin, the sky was already fading, light thinning into a dull gray. The cabin sat in a clearing that felt carved out rather than natural, like the woods had been pushed back just enough to make room for it. The building was small, one story, dark wood walls, a metal roof spotted with rust. It looked solid, heavy, like it had been there longer than I had been alive. I noticed the smell first when I stepped out of the car. Wet leaves, old wood, and something faintly sour, like metal left in the rain. The air was cold enough to make my breath visible. I stood there longer than necessary, keys still in my hand, listening. No wind, no birds, no distant cars, just stillness. It felt thick, like it pressed against my ears. Inside, the cabin was dim but not dirty. A small window faced the clearing. Dust lay in thin lines on the floor, not thick enough to suggest abandonment. There was a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and a small kitchen area with a sink and cabinets. The place smelled like old wood and cold air. I walked through slowly, checking corners, opening cabinets, looking under the bed. Everything felt normal, which should have been comforting, but instead it made me uneasy in a quiet way I couldn't explain. I unpacked as the light faded outside. When night finally settled, it did so fast, like someone had turned a switch. Darkness pressed against the windows, making the glass look black and solid. I turned on the single overhead light, and it hummed softly, casting a yellow glow that didn't reach the corners of the room. I ate standing up, listening to the sound of my own chewing, suddenly aware of how loud it was. That was when I heard the first sound outside. It wasn't dramatic. Just a dull toot, far away, like something heavy hitting the ground. I froze, holding my breath. After a few seconds, nothing followed. I told myself it was a falling branch or an animal moving through the brush. The woods are full of noises. That's what woods do. I repeated that thought until my body relaxed again. Later, lying in bed, I noticed something else. The silence wasn't complete. There was a faint, irregular sound, almost like footsteps, but too slow and too far apart to be clear. I sat up, listening harder. The sound stopped. My chest felt tight, like I had been holding my breath without realizing it. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally pulled me under. I woke before sunrise to a different smell. Stronger this time. Metallic, sharp, mixed with damp earth. It seemed to seep into the cabin from somewhere. I sat up slowly, heart already beating faster. The light outside was pale, barely enough to see shapes through the window. I got dressed and stepped outside, drawn by the need to understand what I was smelling. Near the edge of the clearing, I found disturbed ground. Leaves pushed aside, dirt exposed. There were marks there, deep grooves pressed into the soil. Not animal tracks I recognized, too wide, uneven, like something heavy had been dragged. I followed them a short distance before they disappeared into thicker brush. I stood there, cold seeping into my boots, and felt a strong urge to go back inside, like my body knew something my mind didn't want to accept. The rest of the morning passed in a strange haze. I tried to read, but I kept losing my place. Every small sound made me look up. The cabin felt smaller in daylight, the walls closer.
Around noon, I noticed something else. One of the windows had a smear on the outside, right at eye level. Dark, streaked, as if something had brushed against the glass. I stared at it for a long time before wiping it away with a cloth. The stain came off easily, leaving the glass clear. That somehow made it worse. By late afternoon, the woods felt different. Not quieter, but heavier. Shadows gathered early under the trees. I tried to distract myself by cleaning, moving things around, making the space feel more mine. When I lifted the rug near the bed, I found scratches in the wooden floor beneath. Long, shallow lines crossing each other. They looked old, worn smooth by time, but intentional. I put the rug back carefully, my hands shaking just a little. As night approached again, I considered leaving. The thought came sudden and strong. I imagined driving away, the road opening up, the trees thinning. But then I thought about how tired I was, how far I had come, how irrational it would look to leave because of smells and scratches and sounds that could all be explained. I locked the door, checked the windows, and told myself I would leave in the morning. That night, the sounds returned, closer this time. Slow, deliberate movements around the cabin. The soft crunch of leaves, the faint scrape of something brushing against wood. Izette on the bed, back against the wall, holding my flashlight like it could protect me. The light trembled in my hand. At one point, something pressed against the outer wall, hard enough to make the boards creak. Dust fell from the ceiling in fine grains. I bit down on my lip to keep from making any noise, even though I knew sound probably didn't matter. The pressure against the wall moved, sliding along the cabin side. I followed it with my eyes, even though I couldn't see through the wood. When it reached the corner near the door, it stopped. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. I stayed like that for hours, muscles aching, until dawn light finally crept through the window. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag, keys shaking in my hand, and opened the door. The clearing looked wrong, not damaged, just altered. Walked this tuliped ground, closer to the cabin now. The marks were clearer. Deep impressions, almost hand-shaped but too large, fingers dragged through dirt. On the door frame, just below the handle, were scratches that hadn't been there before. Fresh wood showed through the dark stain. I got in the car and started it, the engine sounded loud and comforting. As I pulled away, I saw movement at the edge of the trees. Not fast, not dramatic. Just a shape pulling back into the woods, tall and uneven, like a person standing wrong. I didn't stop to look closer, I drove. The road felt longer on the way out. Every bend made me expect something to block the path, but nothing did. When I finally reached pavement and saw signs of other people, I pulled over and cried, the kind that shakes your whole body. Later, much later, I looked up the cabin. I found old records, articles buried deep online, reports of missing hikers, hunters who never came back, all centered around that stretch of woods. The cabin was mentioned once, briefly, as a place authorities avoided searching too deeply because the land was unstable, dangerous, easy to get lost in. No explanations beyond that. I didn't go back, I never will. What scares me most isn't that something followed me or tried to hurt me directly. It's how patient it felt, how familiar it seemed with the cabin, the clearing, the way fear settles in slowly. Whatever lives in those woods doesn't need to chase, it waits. And the cabin is part of how it waits, standing there quietly, inviting people like me to believe nothing bad will happen if we just stay a little longer.
I rented the cabin because I wanted quiet, not because I wanted to feel brave. It was late October, the kind of cold that does not hurt yet but sits on your skin and stays there. The road up the mountain was narrow and full of loose stones. My car struggled the whole way. Trees leaned close on both sides, tall and thin, blocking the sky. The last mile was dirt, no lights, no signs, just tire marks that looked old and shallow, like not many people came here anymore. The cabin was smaller than it looked in the pictures. One floor, a low roof, dark wood that had faded into gray. The porch boards were uneven, some of them soft under my shoes. A single window faced the trees. Another window was on the side, looking down the slope. There was no fence, no nearby cabins, nothing but forest in every direction. When I shut the car door, the sound felt too loud. After that, the silence came back fast, thick and heavy. Inside, the air smelled old. Not rotten, just unused. Dust sat on every surface, even though the place was supposed to be cleaned. There was a couch, a small table, a bed pushed against the wall, and a little kitchen area. The walls were thin logs, dark with age. The windows had no curtains, just bare glass. I noticed scratches on the inside of the door, low and thin, like someone had dragged something sharp across it over and over. I told myself it was from moving furniture or a pet from years ago. I unpacked slowly, trying to settle in. The daylight faded quicker than I expected. The trees blocked most of the sun, and the cabin slipped into shadow early. By the time I turned on the lights, it felt like night already. The lights were weak and yellow. They did not reach the corners of the room. Every sound I made seemed louder than it should be. The floor creaked under my steps. The wind moved through the trees outside, making a low sound that never stopped. I cooked a simple meal and ate it standing up because sitting felt wrong. I kept looking at the windows without meaning to. They reflected the inside of the cabin at night, turning the glass into mirrors. My own shape followed me in them. When I finally sat on the couch, I noticed something outside the side window. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but it did not move with the wind. It stayed in the same place, dark and narrow, close to a tree. I waited. After a long time, it shifted. Just a little. That was when I understood it was not a shadow at all. It was something solid, blocking the starlight. I could not see details, just the shape. I told myself it was a tree trunk I had not noticed before, even though I knew I had looked out that window earlier and it had not been there. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would make the fear fade. The mattress was thin and dipped in the middle. The cabin made noises as it cooled, small pops and cracks that sounded too much like footsteps when I tried not to think. I kept the light on. The window by the bed showed nothing but black. I lay there with my eyes open for a long time. Sometime later, I heard something outside. Not an animal. It was slow and careful. Leaves moved in short bursts, then stopped. Whatever it was knew how to move quietly. My chest felt tight. I stayed still, barely breathing, listening. The sound came closer to the cabin, then stopped near the porch. The floor creaked once near the door. I knew I had not moved. The sound came again, closer to the door this time. Then nothing. The silence after was worse than the noise. My ears rang as I waited for something else to happen. Morning came eventually, gray and cold. I had not slept. When I opened the door, I saw fresh footprints in the dirt. Human footprints. They circled the cabin slowly, like someone had walked around it more than once. They stopped under my window, right where the bed was. I felt sick when I saw how close they were. I thought about leaving right then, but my car had trouble starting in the cold. The engine coughed and failed twice before finally turning over. He stood there with the door open, listening to the sound echo through the trees. No one appeared. No movement. Just forest and fog. I told myself daylight made things safer. I decided to stay one more night, to prove I was not letting fear control me. I hated that thought as soon as it formed, but I stayed anyway. During the day, I explored a little around the cabin. I found an old fire pit behind it, cold and unused. There were empty cans buried in the dirt nearby, rusted and sharp. A trail led downhill, narrow and overgrown. I followed it for a short distance and found something that made my stomach drop. A small clearing. In it sat a plastic chair, faded and cracked. Next to it was a pile of cigarette butts and food wrappers. Someone had been spending time there, watching the cabin. I went back inside and locked the door. I closed the windows as much as I could, even though they did not lock properly. As evening came again, my fear came back stronger. The woods grew darker, the air colder, the wind picked up, shaking the trees hard enough to make branches scrape against the cabin walls. Night fell fast. The lights flickered once, then stayed on. I sat on the bed, fully dressed, my shoes still on. I did not turn my back to the door. I did not close my eyes. The sounds started again. Slow steps on the leaves. My porch boards creaked under weight that was not mine. Something brushed against the side of the cabin, low and careful. Then came the scratching. Soft at first, then harder. Not random. Focused.
like someone testing the wood. The handle on the door moved, just a little, not enough to open it, but enough to make it clear someone was there. I felt frozen. My hands shook, but I did not move. I knew any sound from me would give away where I was. The scratching moved to the window, fingernails against glass. The slow lines dragged down, leaving faint marks. The shape appeared again, closer this time. I could see more now. A person standing just outside the light, leaning in to look. I could not see a face, only the outline of a head and shoulders. The body stayed still for a long time. Then the figure stepped back. The footsteps moved away, not rushed, calm, like they knew I could not do anything.
Hours passed. The sounds did not return. I stayed awake until morning, my body aching from tension. When light finally came, I ran to the car and did not look back. I drove straight to the nearest town and went to the local station. Later that day, officers went to the cabin. They found a small shelter hidden deeper in the woods. A tarp, old blankets, empty food cans. They found a notebook wrapped in plastic. Inside were notes about the cabin, about when the lights were on, about when someone arrived, about me. The cabin was taken off the rental site soon after. I was told the man living in the woods had been there for years, watching people come and go, waiting for someone who stayed long enough. I still think about how quiet he was, how patient, how close I was to being just another set of notes in that book. I do not go looking for quiet anymore. I learned that silence can hide someone who has already been watching, long before you ever arrive. I went to the cabin because I wanted quiet and space. That is the truth I keep telling myself even now. I had been tired of noise, tired of screens, tired of feeling watched in a way that had nothing to do with people and everything to do with life feeling too close. The cabin was something I found online, deep in the woods, far from towns and paved roads. The pictures showed rough wooden walls, a small porch, and trees packed so tight behind it that the sun barely touched the ground. It looked empty and calm. It looked like nothing could reach me there. The drive took most of the day. The last hour was on a narrow dirt road that twisted through thick forest. The trees grew taller the farther I went, their branches leaning over the road like they were trying to touch the car. My phone lost signal early on, and the radio turned into soft static. I remember thinking that it felt good to be cut off. I didn't think about how final that felt until later. When I finally reached the cabin, it was late afternoon. The sky was already turning dull, the light flat and gray. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded on all sides by trees. No other buildings were visible. There were no tracks except the ones my tires made. The place smelled like wet wood and old leaves. The air felt heavy, like rain had just passed through or was about to come back. The cabin itself was smaller than the pictures made it seem. One room, a small kitchen corner, a narrow bed against the wall, and a bathroom that looked like it had been added as an afterthought. The windows were old and cloudy, and the door made a low, tired sound when I pushed it open. Inside, everything was clean but worn. Scratches into floor. Faded spots on the walls. A thick layer of dust in places no one touched often. I dropped my bag on the floor and walked around slowly, touching things, grounding myself in the space. The silence was deep. Not peaceful, but thick. Outside, the woods made soft sounds I couldn't place. Leaves shifting. Wood popping. Something moving far away, then stopping. I told myself it was just animals. That thought stayed with me like a weak shield. As night came, the forest darkened fast. There were no lights outside, no glow from nearby houses or roads. When the sun finally dropped, it felt like someone had shut off the world. I turned on the cabin's single overhead light, and it barely pushed back the dark. The windows turned into black mirrors, reflecting my own face back at me, pale and stretched by the glass. I ate a simple meal and tried to relax. I read a few pages of a book, but my eyes kept lifting from the words. Every small sound felt louder inside the cabin. A tap against the wall, a creak from the roof, wind moving through the trees in long, slow waves. Later, when I lay down on the bed, sleep didn't come easy. The mattress was thin and every shift of my weight made noise. I stared at the ceiling, counting my breaths. Somewhere outside, something moved through the leaves. It sounded slow and careful, not rushed like an animal running. I waited for it to fade. It didn't. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke up, the cabin was still dark. I checked my watch. Just after 3 in the morning, I lay still, listening. The woods were quiet now, too quiet. No insects, no wind. The silence pressed against the walls. Then I heard it. A dull sound, low and heavy, coming from somewhere outside the cabin. It wasn't close enough to touch the walls, but it wasn't far either. It happened once, then again, spaced out, like something was stepping carefully on soft ground. I held my breath without meaning to. My body felt tight, ready to move, but I didn't know where I would go. The sound stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. I told myself I was overreacting. That fear does strange things in places like this. I lay there until the sky slowly lightened and morning finally came. Daylight made everything look normal again. The woods were still dense, but they seemed less threatening. Birds moved through the branches. The air smelled fresh. I felt embarrassed by how scared I had been. I spent the day outside, walking around the clearing, keeping the cabin in sight. I noticed things I hadn't seen before. Footprints near the edge of the trees. They were old, half filled with leaves and dirt, but they were there, human-sized, leading away from the cabin, not toward it. I told myself they could have been from the owner, from months ago. Still, I couldn't stop looking at them. That night, I locked the door before bed. I don't remember doing it the first night. The thought bothered me more than it should have. The second night was worse. I woke up to a sound that came from right outside the cabin wall. Something brushed against the wood, slow and steady, like a hand sliding along the side. I froze. My heart hammered so hard, I was sure it could be heard outside. The sound moved toward the window. I stayed where I was, barely breathing. The brush stopped. I waited for glass to break. It didn't. After a long moment, the sound pulled away, disappearing back into the forest. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, I found marks on the outside wall, long uneven lines in the dirt and dust that clung to the wood. Not deep enough to cut, but clear enough to see. Something had touched the cabin. That was when the fear stopped feeling distant and started feeling real. I packed my bag that afternoon. I told myself I would leave first thing in the morning. I didn't want to drive those roads at night. I stayed inside, watching the light fade, checking the windows again and again. When darkness fell, the woods came alive with sound, not normal forest noise, movement that felt close, heavy steps, pauses, then more steps. I sat on the bed, shoes on, bag beside me. My eyes stayed locked on the door. The handle didn't move. Nothing knocked. Instead, I heard something else. The sound of weight shifting on the porch. What creaking under pressure? I stood slowly, my legs shaking. The overhead light flickered once, then stayed on. I could hear breathing now, low and steady. Too controlled to be an animal. The door didn't open. Whoever or whatever was out there didn't rush. It waited. Minutes passed. My muscles burned from standing still. Then the pressure lifted from the porch. The steps moved away, circling the cabin. I followed the sound as it passed each wall, then stopped behind the cabin where I couldn't see. I didn't know how long I stood there after it left. Eventually, silence returned. Not the calm silence from before, but an empty one. At first light, I didn't wait. I unlocked the door, stepped outside, and ran to my car. My hands shook so badly it took me 3 tries to start it. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the cabin. I kept my eyes on the road, on the thin strip of dirt that led me out of the woods. When I reached the main road and my phone signal returned, I didn't stop. I drove until the trees thinned and houses appeared. I didn't feel safe until there were people around again. Later, days later, I tried to explain it to myself. I told myself it could have been a person living nearby, someone who didn't want strangers. I told myself fear made it worse than it was. But sometimes, late at night, I remember the slow steps, the careful waiting, the way nothing tried to break in or scare me away fast. Whatever was out there didn't need to rush. It already knew where I was. I never went back for the rest of my things. I never contacted the owner. I stopped looking for quiet places far from people. The woods don't scare me anymore in a simple way. What scares me is knowing how easy it is to be alone somewhere. No one can hear you, and how patient someone can be when they know that too. I went to the cabin alone because I wanted quiet and because I thought being alone would make me feel strong. The cabin was not fancy. It was old wood, dark from years of rain, sitting in a bowl of trees far away from the main road. The driveway was just dirt and stones, and my car shook the whole way in. When I turned the engine off, the silence felt heavy, like it had weight. No wind, no birds, nothing moving. I remember standing there with my keys still in my hand, listening, waiting for something normal to happen. Nothing did. The cabin smelled like dust and old pine when I opened the door. The air inside was cold, even though it was late summer. There was one main room, a small kitchen corner, a bathroom, and a bedroom in the back. Everything was simple and worn. Scratches on the floor, stains on the counter, a couch with flattened cushions. It felt like a place that had been used a lot and then forgotten. I dropped my bag near the door and walked around, touching things without thinking. The table was rough under my fingers. The window glass was cloudy. The door locks worked, but they felt loose, like they had been forced before. I told myself I was being dramatic. I unpacked slowly, putting food in the small fridge and clothes in the bedroom dresser. Outside, the trees stood close together. Thick trunks, dark bark, branches tangled high up. The light barely reached the ground. I noticed there were no nearby cabins, no lights, no signs of people. I knew that already, but seeing it made it real. I checked my phone. 1 week bar, sometimes none. I told myself I would be fine for a few days. That first evening, I cooked pasta on the small stove. The sound of boiling water felt too loud in the quiet. When I ate, I sat facing the window. The sky turned gray, then darker, faster than I expected. The woods swallowed the light. I turned on the lamps. Their yellow glow barely pushed back the dark. I kept feeling like something was off, not scary yet, just wrong, like being watched without seeing eyes. Later, when it was fully dark, I heard a sound outside. It was soft and slow, like footsteps on dirt. Not close, but not far. It froze with my fork halfway to my mouth. I listened hard. The sound stopped. I waited. My heart beat so loud I could hear it in my ears. After a long moment, I told myself it was an animal. Deer, maybe. I finished eating, but the food tasted like nothing. Before bed, I locked the door and checked the windows. One window in the living area did not lock all the way. The latch moved but never caught. I pushed it down again and again until my fingers hurt. It stayed loose. I placed a chair under the handle, even though I knew that would not stop much. In the bedroom, I shut the door and locked it. The lock clicked, thin and weak. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound the cabin made. The wood creaked as it cooled. Something brushed against the side of the cabin, slow and steady. I told myself it was branches. Sometime into night, I woke up. I did not know why at first. Then I realized the sound that had woken me was breathing. Not mine. It was faint, uneven, like someone trying to be quiet. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped. I stayed frozen, muscles burning, waiting for it to start again. After a long time, I heard footsteps moving away from the cabin. Slow, careful. I did not sleep after that. In the morning, the light made everything look less scary, but not safe. I walked outside to look around. Near the side of the cabin, I saw footprints in the dirt. They were not animal prints. They were boot prints. Fresh. My chest felt tight. I followed them with my eyes. They circled the cabin once, then disappeared into the trees. I stood there shaking, trying to think clearly. I told myself maybe a hiker had passed by, but no trail ran near the cabin, no reason for someone to be that close. I checked my car. The doors were locked, but there was a long scratch on the side that had not been there before. It ran along the paint, deep enough to feel with my fingernail. I went back inside and locked the door again. I tried calling someone, anyone. The call would not go through. Messages failed to send. I felt cut off, like the woods had closed around me. I spent the day inside, watching through the windows. I barely ate. Every sound made me jump. In the afternoon, I noticed something new. One of my bags had been moved. I was sure I had left it by the door. Now it was closer to the kitchen, turned a different way. My skin went cold. I searched the cabin, checking every corner, every shadow. No one was there. Nothing else was missing. Nothing else was moved. Just the bag. It felt like a message. That night came too fast. I blocked the door with the table and couch. I kept the lights on. I sat on the bed with a knife from the kitchen in my hand. My thoughts ran in circles. I told myself to stay calm, to stay quiet. Hours passed like that. Then I heard the door handle move, slowly, carefully. It did not rattle. It turned just enough to test it. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. The handle stopped. Then it turned again, a little more. The furniture creaked as pressure was put against the door. Whoever it was knew what they were doing. The pressure stopped. I waited, barely breathing. Then came the sound of scraping metal, the loose window ledge. I realized they were at the window I could not lock. The chair scraped softly as it was pushed aside. The window slid open, just a little. Cold air rushed in. I felt like I was going to pass out. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I listened as something came through the window, slow and controlled. Footsteps on the floor. A pause. Another step. I stayed perfectly still. The footsteps moved through the cabin. I could tell where they were by the floorboards creaking. They stopped near the bedroom door. He saw the shadow under the door, blocking the light. The handle moved. The lock held. The handle moved again, harder this time. The door shook. Then it stopped. The shadow stayed there for a long time. I thought about screaming, about running, about fighting. None of it felt possible. Eventually, the shadow moved away. I heard footsteps return to the window. The shadow of metal again. Silence. I waited until my body started to ache from being so tense. When I finally moved, it was just to lock my hands tighter around the knife.
Morning came.
I waited until the sun was high. When I opened the bedroom door, the cabin looked the same, but it felt violated.
Dirt footprints marked the floor. The window was closed again, but not locked. On the table, there was something that had not been there before. A small object. A key. Not my key. Old, worn, with a bent edge. I understood then. Whoever had been here had access. They could come back any time. I did not pack carefully. I threw things into my bag, hands shaking so badly I dropped stuff. Octave occluded the windows, the door, the trees. I ran to my car and started it. As I drove away, I saw movement between the trees. A shape standing still, watching. I did not slow down. I did not look back again.
I went straight to the nearest town and did not stop until I saw people and buildings. I reported everything. The cabin owner never contacted me again. Later, I learned the cabin had a history of break-ins, people using it as a place to hide, to wait. The locks had never been properly fixed. The area was known for that kind of thing. I do not go to cabins anymore. I do not stay alone in places where help is far away. At night, I still wake up sometimes, listening for breathing that is not mine. What scares me the most is not the memory of the footsteps or the shadow under the door. It is knowing that what happened was real, simple, and human. Someone chose that cabin. Someone chose to wait. And if I had stayed one more night, I am certain I would not have left on my own. I went to the cabin because I wanted to be alone, and I told myself that was the only reason. I had taken time off work, loaded my car with groceries, fuel cans, a flashlight, extra batteries, a small first aid kit, and a cheap trail map I printed at home. The cabin sat deep in the woods, miles from the nearest paved road. It belonged to a distant relative who barely used it anymore. I had been there once in summer. Back then it felt quiet and empty in a good way. This time it was late fall, almost winter, and the quiet felt heavier, like it had weight. The road in was barely a road. Gravel turned to dirt, dirt turned to mud, and the trees closed in until the sky looked like a thin gray ribbon above me. My tires slipped a few times, and I had to slow down to a crawl. When I finally reached the clearing, the cabin looked smaller than I remembered. The wood was darker, soaked from days of rain. The park sagged a little more on one side. Leaves were piled against the door like they had been pushed there on purpose, even though I knew it was just the wind. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Old wood, damp air, dust, and something sour that I couldn't name. The inside was one room with a small kitchen area, a table, a couch, and a loft above. There was no electricity. Light came in through 2 windows, but the glass was cloudy and streaked. I set my bags down and stood still, listening. The cabin made small noises, pops and creaks, like it was stretching after a long sleep. I spent the first hour cleaning. I wiped the table, swept the floor, and checked every corner. I looked behind the couch, under the sink, inside the small storage closet. Everything seemed normal. Old, worn, but normal. I stacked firewood near the stove and lit a fire. The sound of it helped. The crackling filled the space and pushed back the silence a little. Night came faster than I expected. The light faded, and the woods outside turned into a solid wall of black. I closed the shutters and lit a lantern. Shadows jumped on the walls as the flame moved. I ate a simple meal and tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the door and the windows. Every small sound felt louder. Wind through the trees sounded like something heavy moving slowly. The first strange thing I noticed was the smell. It came and went, faint but wrong. It smelled like cold metal and wet fur. I told myself it was the firewood or something outside. Animals lived out here. That was normal. Still, I checked the door twice to make sure it was locked. I slept on the couch that night. I didn't go up to the loft. I don't know why. The couch felt safer, closer to the door and the windows where I could see if something changed. I slept badly. I kept waking up, heart racing, convinced I heard footsteps. Each time I lay still and listened until the sounds faded back into the normal noises of the woods. In the morning, I found footprints near the cabin. They were fresh, pressed deep into the soft ground. They were human. The size looked like a man's boot. They circled the cabin once and then led off into the trees. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. My first thought was that someone must have passed by, maybe a hunter. That thought didn't make me feel better. I spent the day trying to calm myself down. I explored a little around the clearing, staying close to the cabin. I noticed things I hadn't before. A tree a short distance away had old marks on it, deep cuts like someone had tested a blade there. A pile of stones sat near the edge of the woods, stacked too neatly to be random. None of it proved anything, but together it made my skin feel tight. That afternoon, I checked my car. One of the tires was low, not flat, just low enough to notice. He hadn't driven over anything sharp. I stood there with the air pump in my hand, staring at the tire, feeling a slow, heavy fear settle in my stomach. That night was worse. The smell came back stronger. I heard movement outside, slow and steady, not like an animal running. It moved around the cabin, stopping sometimes, then continuing. I sat on the couch with my flashlight in my hand, barely breathing. The sounds went on for a long time. At some point, I realized the steps were careful, placed quietly, like whoever was out there knew exactly where to put their feet. When the sounds finally stopped, I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I found the porch railing damaged. One of the boards had been pressed down hard, cracked at the edge. Something heavy had leaned on it. I walked the perimeter again and found more footprints, clearer this time. They came closer to the windows. One set stopped right beneath the one near the table, where I had been sitting with the lantern the night before. I felt stupid for staying, but leaving didn't feel simple anymore.
The road out was long and rough, and my tire worried me. Still, I packed a bag and decided I would leave after checking the car again and filling the tire fully. When I went to the car, I saw the slash. It was small, clean, and deliberate. The tire was ruined. My hands shook as I stood there. I understood then that this wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. Someone knew I was there. Someone had been watching me long enough to choose the right moment to act. I went back inside and locked the door. I closed the shutters and pushed the table against the door, even though I knew it wouldn't stop much. I kept the fire low, so less light would show. Time dragged. Every minute felt stretched and thin. As evening came, the noises started earlier. Branches snapped, leaves shifted. I smelled that same cold, wet scent again. I didn't move from the corner near the stove. My flashlight stayed on, aimed at the door. Later, I heard weight against the wall. Not a hit, just pressure, like someone leaning and listening. The cabin creaked in response. I imagined a face inches from the wood, an ear pressed flat, a hand resting against the logs. The thought made my chest hurt. At some point during the night, I heard the sound of metal scraping lightly against wood. It moved along the wall, slow and patient. I knew then that the person outside wasn't in a hurry. That scared me more than anything else. Morning came gray and cold. I hadn't slept. The woods looked normal again, almost peaceful, which felt wrong after the night before. I made a decision I should have made earlier. I grabbed my keys, my bag, and a heavy piece of firewood, and I left the cabin. I walked. I stayed on the rough trail, moving fast but quietly. I didn't look back much. Every sound behind me made my muscles tighten. I walked for hours, my legs burning, my throat dry. I thought about the footprints, the tire, the careful steps in the dark. I thought about how close that person had been while I sat inside pretending I was alone. Near the afternoon, I reached a wider dirt road. It felt unreal, like stepping into a different world. Eventually a truck passed. I would flag it down without thinking. I climbed into the back, my body finally giving in to exhaustion. Later, after I got help and told authorities where the cabin was, they went back there. They found signs of someone living nearby, deep in the woods.
A small hidden camp. Tools. Food wrappers. Fresh boot prints that matched the ones around the cabin.
The person was never found. I never went back. The cabin is still there, as far as I know, slowly sinking into the ground. Wood rotting, porch sagging a little more every year.
I think about how quiet it was when I arrived, and how I thought that quiet meant safety. Now I know better. Some places are quiet because someone else already knows every sound they make, and they don't need to be loud at all.